Hello, Andrew Martin here once again, and welcome to the final video in this series about who Guildford Chess Club has lined up to play the public on September the 11th as part of its 125 years of existence celebrations. And as I say, last but not least is one of the strongest female players in the UK, Akshaya Kalaiyalahan. I made a complete mess of pronouncing her name in an earlier video, but I think I've got it right this time. Anyway, Akshaya is a tremendously good player. She has been the British Women's Chess Champion twice, I believe, in 2013 and 2015. She's represented England on a number of occasions, notably in two Olympiads, one in Norway and one in Baku, Azerbaijan. And she is a really strong strategic player. If you play her, watch out, because she can encircle somebody with her brilliant ideas. Well, I've chosen a game from the European Under-18 Girls' Championship, which was played in Riga in 2018, which kind of illustrates her style. And she's white against Nikolina Kolechievich. And the opening is a Tarrasch defence to the Queen's Gambit. Here we go, c5. This is the natural freeing move as black in the Queen's Gambit. And if it can be played, it usually should be played. But this is a controversial variation because black is allowing white to weaken the pawn structure. And this Akshaya strives to do straight away by taking on d5. And the point is that now this pawn on d5 can't be protected by other black pawns. And this makes it quite weak. On the other hand, black can develop freely. And so here we have the debate surrounding the Tarrasch variation. Which is more important? Black's active and aggressive development, or the fact that white can zero in on a pawn weakness more or less throughout the game? It's a question of taste as to which side you take. Well, white played g3. This is the main line. And the point of this is to put the bishop on g2, which kind of targets the pawn on d5. A logical place for the bishop. But black can keep the pieces flowing out. And this is exactly what Kolechievich does in this game. And now we have a standard mainline position on the board. And perhaps slightly surprisingly, Akshaya plays d takes c5, which is kind of an old-fashioned move in this position. In the early days of the Tarrasch, we're talking about 1920s, things like that. This was one of white's first reactions. And I believe it was a favourite of a very famous player called Rubinstein. And one of the ideas is, of course, that it's very direct. After bishop takes c5, the pawn on d5 is suddenly exposed and weak. Quite interesting after d takes c5 is the push d4. And this is the Tarrasch Gambit. And I wonder how Akshaya would have met that move. Black gives up a pawn, but in return, he gets excellent centralisation and the clear plan of a bishop e4 and then rooks to the middle. You can play the next 5 or 6 moves pretty quickly in a position like this with black. Whereas with white, you kind of got to struggle a bit to find the best defensive moves. However, that's not to say that somebody as strong as Akshaya wouldn't have found a way through the complications. I mean, there are ways through. And the Tarrasch Gambit could best be described as speculative. Interesting, but speculative. Anyway, bishop takes c5, very direct. Now knight to a4. Bishop goes back. And Akshaya puts the bishop on e3. And that's a very good move. Strategically, number one, it controls the square in front of the isolated pawn, which means that black can't dissolve the pawn by pushing it at any moment. You know, if black could push that pawn up the board and get rid of it just by exchanging it off, then that's really what they would like to do. But they can't now. Number two, white's controlling c5. And on a positional basis, that's quite important. Because at any moment, white may be putting the bishop in on c5 or could be putting that knight in on c5. And this would be a pretty nice outpost for a white minor piece. Well, black continues in Tarrasch style, just getting the pieces out. And queen comes up to d7. Akshaya forces the pace, which gets the knight off the edge. And black feels that she should take that and put a rook on e8. Which, of course, is, again, pretty logical. The rook comes to a half-open file and eyes the pawn on e2 at the end of it. Rook goes to e1. Two-way move. Number one, it protects. Number two, it guards against bishop h3. Because after that, I think white will almost certainly retain the bishop and play bishop h1. Black played rook a c8. Well, just dropping back. I mean, that looks like the most natural move on the board. But I wonder whether black would have done better here to play knight e4. To me, that looks like a typical Tarrasch move. Striving to be as active as possible. Because in the end, going back to the game, rook a c8 only encourages exchanges. And black's got to be a bit careful here because endgames are quite bad for him. Excuse me, I'm getting carried away with these green arrows. Endgames can be quite bad with the isolated pawn. Black doesn't want to exchange off too many pieces here. So white just improves her position very slightly and then plays bishop d4. I mean, I think that move illustrates actually that although black's got this weakness, it's still quite difficult for white to grind anything out here if black plays properly. And now I'm completely sure that black should play knight e4. You know, I think black's next move is probably a mistake. It looks so natural to take off some pieces. But in the end, it reacts against black. I'm sure black was envisaging the queen comes out to a4, hitting the knight. She protects the knight. And now the rook comes to c8. And black is keeping active. But at the same time, you know, how are you going to get into white's position? There's no square on the c-file that you can hope to penetrate on. And white's threatening rook c1. The more pieces that come off, the weaker that pawn on d5 becomes. And this is what black's got to really watch out for. Well, she played queen c4, which at least has the merit of stopping rook c1. And now h3. Akshaya is one of those players that kind of creeps up on you during a game. You know, she doesn't seem as though she's doing very much. But as you'll see here, suddenly she takes over the entire position with a series of very good moves. And sensing nothing, black played bishop h5, which is, again, a mistake. However, bishop d7, which I think is probably the only move here, would certainly be answered by something like rook d1. And black's disadvantage persists. She's got basically a weak pawn and nothing to show for it. So that would be a bit of a grind for white, but nevertheless, quite a big advantage. However, after bishop h5, f4, excellent move. Now black is in serious trouble because white's threatening to swamp that bishop on h5. Just play g4, and if the bishop goes back, f5, and the bishop drops off the board. Well, I'm not sure what black can do about it, to be absolutely honest. Now, I think white's position is suddenly revealed as winning because all the white pieces are in the right places. Black's got nothing to attack. And white is threatening g4. Black's next move is kind of hopeless, g5. And white moves in with queen f5, which is just a complete crusher because it threatens the pawn, the knight, and the king beyond. So black took, more or less giving up, took again, knight f5, thank you very much. And black resigns. White's threatening checkmate on g7. Not much you can do about that. And a surprisingly quick end to this game. So Akshaya, very accomplished and experienced player, and the last member of the Guildford squad to face the public on September the 11th. And we look forward to welcoming you to our grand simultaneous display.